During the WWF steroid trial, it was alleged that Jerry Jarrett would take over if Vince had to go away. The Artful Dodger portrayed Jarrett as an idiot redneck and that he was never considered for such a role. What is Jim Cornette's opinion?
I answered this on Twitter because I couldn't really wait. But here's the thing. And once again, and Bruce tells some very entertaining stories. I think Bruce is the sports entertainment of podcasting. He tells some very interesting stories, and the validity of some may be in question. But he just don't like Jerry Jarrett, so he tries to make people think that. And also because he does a entertaining impersonation or whatever, and it's part of his thing. But no, that is... If anybody is looking at this, why else was Jerry Jarrett there, and why has everybody pretty much universally acknowledged that, except for Bruce Pritchard and I believe Pat Patterson, because the boys had a name for Bruce and Pat, and it was Bruce and Pat. It was one word, Bruce and Pat, because they were joined at the hip. And I think that especially Bruce probably saw Jerry Jarrett as a threat, because Bruce and Pat had gotten into a lot of the ha-ha at that point. We're doing a lot of the, and of course Vince merrily encouraged it, but Jerry would have been more serious. Jerry would have been more wrestling. Jerry would have cut a lot of the budgets and a lot of the nonsense, probably related to some of the wrestling at that point in time. It was entirely feasible that Jerry Jarrett could be the maintenance operator of the wrestling side of the company if Vince did go away for a couple of years. He was the last promoter left pretty much at that point, except for me in my territory, and they'd get me about a year later. He didn't have to worry about Jerry stealing the company from him because he knew that Jerry didn't want it. He was just the only guy that really probably Vince could trust that didn't want it, wouldn't steal it, but was still an experienced wrestling promoter and operator of wrestling company that had been successful when all the other ones either hated Vince or had gone out of business or both. And as Jerry Jarrett told here on the Experience one time, a long time ago when he was on, he had a relationship with Vince Sr., and Vince Sr. had told him back in the early days when he was found out that he was sick and was selling to Vince Jr., he told Jerry Jarrett, "My son is going to make a lot of enemies one of these days, and I hope if he needs help, you'll be around for him." So that's why Jarrett agreed to do that. He hated going to Connecticut. He told me he was up to drinking 2 bottles of wine every night. Jerry Jarrett's not a drinker, especially at that point in his life.
Sounds like Dixie.
Except Jerry was actually responsible for something. And you know, then when, of course, that's when he brought Lawler up there. That's when Jerry started working for the WWF. It was during that tenure that he probably put a word in, because I went up with Heavenly Bodies. But then it became obvious Vince wasn't going to jail. Jerry was not required in that role, and he was more than happy to go back home. But he still, Vince paid him for, I believe, a year or more as a consultant at home. And they didn't part enemies, which is probably the only time I can think of that another wrestling promoter didn't part enemies with Vince McMahon. Well, and then Watts a year or two later. But Bruce wants to maintain the narrative because I think, like I said, he probably felt Jerry was a threat to what they were doing. He didn't like him personally. They didn't get along. Everybody else has admitted that's what Jerry was there for. Jerry said it. J.J. Dillon's acknowledged it. That's pretty much I didn't go barge in and ask who was going to be running the place if Vince went to the big house, but that's the impression I got when I was working there at the time. So, you know.
That's what I heard at the time. I don't know what to say. That's what I heard at the time.
That's what as I think it was either Dave Chappelle or somebody said, I don't know it for a fact, but a lot of people saying it. You know, so that's just, there's, you know, basically one guy that's saying no, it's not true, and that Jerry Jarrett, I tweeted that Bruce Pritchard and me, both of us balled into a ball together, would turn cartwheels of happiness if we ever had half the longevity or success or made the money or started the stars or created as many angles and gimmicks and different things in wrestling as Jerry Jarrett did over that long a period of time. And but neither one of us have and are ever going to. So there's that.
Stan and Steve ain't in your bathtub.
Well, Stan was in mine once, but I wasn't.
All right. Before this degenerates any further, a few more questions here, Jim.